10 years after the Second World War, the West decided to give Germany an army again, and to point it east. For Moscow, that was a final provocation. Its response completed the division of Europe into two armed camps. A quick reminder, in 1949, the West had formed NATO, a military alliance binding America to the defence of Western Europe. For years, the Soviet Union had no formal equivalent. It didn't need one. Its tanks already sat in every eastern capital. What changed was Germany. In 1955, West Germany was allowed to rebuild its armed forces and join NATO. Think about how that looked from Moscow. Just 10 years earlier, Germany had invaded the Soviet Union and killed some 27 million of its people. Now, the western half of that same country was being rearmed and folded into the very alliance built against the USSR. To Stalin's successors in the Kremlin, this was a nightmare made real. A rearmed Germany backed by American nuclear weapons right on their doorstep. The USSR felt like they had to answer it, formally, visibly and fast, and they did. West Germany formally joined NATO on the 9th of May 1955. The Warsaw Pact was signed 5 days later. The speed alone tells you it was the answer. On the 14th of May 1955, the Soviet Union and 7 of its Eastern European satellite states signed the Warsaw Pact. Its members were the USSR, East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria and Albania. On paper, it mirrored NATO exactly, a mutual defence alliance in which an attack on one member would be met by all. In reality, it mostly formalised what already existed. The Soviet Union had dominated these countries' armies for years. Now, that domination had a treaty, a name and a single command, placed firmly in Soviet hands. It also gave a tidy legal cover for something very concrete, keeping large numbers of Soviet troops stationed across Eastern Europe, no longer as wartime occupiers, but now as invited allies. With the Warsaw Pact, the map of the Cold War was complete. Two alliances, two armies facing each other across the Iron Curtain. NATO in the west, the Warsaw Pact in the east. Almost every country in Europe now belonged to one side or the other. And the pact was more than just a shield against NATO. It was a chain. It bound the satellite states to Moscow, and it gave the Soviet Union a framework to keep them in line. Within a year, Soviet forces would crush an uprising in Hungary. Years later, they did the same in Czechoslovakia. The alliance built to defend the East was also used to control it. By 1955 then, the confrontation that had begun as mistrust between two wartime allies had hardened into two permanent opposing blocs. The origins of the Cold War were over, and the Cold War itself had fully begun. So, was the Warsaw Pact a defensive response or an instrument of control? The first interpretation was that it was a genuine defensive reaction. NATO had formed first and had just rearmed Germany. Any great power would answer a hostile alliance on its border with an alliance of its own. The pact simply balanced NATO. The second interpretation was that it was mostly for show. The Soviet Union already controlled Eastern Europe by force. The pact merely dressed that control up as a voluntary alliance, and then it became a tool for crushing any member that dared step out of line. Both interpretations capture something real. The Warsaw Pact pointed outward at NATO and inward at its own members. And that brings us to the end of the story of how the Cold War began. Two systems, two alliances, one divided continent. Which leaves the only question that has run through every single episode of this series. Whose fault was it?